Now, according with the schedule, we have the presentation on peatlands in Europe, which will be delivered by Franziska Tannenberger, who represents the University of Greifswald. Franziska, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm sitting here right next to Peene River in Germany. I had to travel today, but it's also nice because it's one of the largest restored peatland areas in northeast Germany with some 20,000 hectares. So thank you for asking me, inviting me to talk about peatlands in Europe, and I can also represent and we joined insight from a large group of peatland scientists across Europe. Just to start with a map, with a global map of peatland distribution, we are, of course, in the northern boreal region, a region with a lot of peatlands. This is the recent global peatland map. And Europe has, with about 1 million square kilometers of organic soils, of peat soils, a rather large part of the global peatland biome. And we also have a long history of peatland studies and peatland use. So we traced back that wetland drainage, for example, in Greece started more than 3,000 years ago. First scientific book on peatlands and peat extraction was published in the Netherlands already in 1650s. And peatland drainage, for example, was taught at universities in Russia already in the late 19th century. For a rather long period of time, between 1991 and 2017, a team of peatland scientists across Europe worked to prepare a joint book about the condition, the distribution of peatlands in Europe, shortly called the European Meyer Book, Meyers and Peatlands of Europe. And 134 national authors from all European countries have been involved in this book. In the framework of producing this book, we also produced the most up-to-date peatland map of Europe, with again, with people from all the different countries. And as you can see on this map, we take a biogeographic approach. So in our understanding of this continent, it really stretches, it includes the Caucasus, it stretches to the Ural Mountains. So it's not at all focusing on the European Union, which you often see when people talk about Europe. And again, you see on the map that, of course, there is a distribution in the northern part of Europe, but I can assure you that peatlands occur in all European countries. We also looked at the diversity of Meyers in Europe and worked on a new map of Meyer regions, which you can see here in the middle. This is largely the work of Asbjørn Moen from Trondheim Museum and University. And I will just quickly walk you through the different Meyer regions of Europe, starting in the north and always accompanied with the typical bird species of this region. So in the very north of Europe, we have the Arctic Meyer region with polygon Meyers, for example, as you can see here on Svalbard. Then we have a region of Palsa Meyers, also influenced by ice activities. This is a picture from Norway with a red-necked phalarope on it. There's the northern fen region, again, towards the south, but still very much in northern Europe. A picture here combined with a golden plover. And this, I mean, you are in Iceland at the moment, so this is a picture from Iceland, and this is a very typical fen from Iceland. More to the south, we have a region of raised bogs. Very much also in the Baltic states, for example, in Russia, in southern Sweden, in southern Finland. And then more to the west again, also in Atlantic bog region, Ireland, Scotland, but also the western coast of Norway, of the Netherlands, Germany, and also in France and Spain. Then there is a continental fen and bog region where fens and bogs are mixed. And here the very typical bird species is the aquatic warbler. I think my most favorite bird species, as I also did my PhD about the aquatic warbler. And there is more to the south of Europe, Namoral submeridional fen region with stretching across Europe from west to east. And the very tiny region we have in the Caucasus is the Colchis Meyer region, where we have very particular percolation bogs in Georgia. That's why it is a kind of unique region. And there is a southern European marsh region stretching across southern Europe in all different parts of southern Europe. The last Maya region of these 10 Maya regions is a mountain Maya region. And this is, as you can see on the small map, typical for the high mountain ranges, especially in the southern Europe. And here, for example, a picture from Azerbaijan. We used data from this mapping and Maya regionality exercise also to look at the degree of protection. So if you look at the total distribution of peatlands in Europe shown on this map and the Maya regions, we assessed together with the Bird Conservation Monitoring Center in Cambridge to what extent peatlands are actually protected. And the overall amount of or percentage of peatland area located in protected areas in Europe is only 16%, which is below typical thresholds we consider. And you also need to recognize that often this is not really peatland protection. It is only that these areas are located in a protected area, but this does not mean that they are actually protected because they are peatlands. Overall, in Europe, we have a high degree of peatland degradation. So in entire Europe as a continent, 25% of the total peatland area is degraded, in a degraded state, so drained. Artificially lowered water tables are typical. If you look only at the European Union, it is even 50%. And on the map, you see those countries in dark color are the worst, so to say. For example, my country, Germany, where we gained more than 95% of the lands. This, of course, equals high greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm sure you are all aware of this connection between peatland drainage, peatland degradation, and the release of CO2. This graphic shows the all globally relevant peatland greenhouse gas emitters. And it is a cumulative curve. So if you start from the left and look at the megatons of CO2, the largest amount is emitted from Indonesia, a tropical peatland country, but then the European Union is already the second best. So a large amount is also from European Union. And in the small part of the graphic, it is separate for the European Union countries. And here you see that Germany is the largest peatland greenhouse gas emitter, followed by Finland, Poland, Ireland, and then a few other countries come. If you look again at the higher part of the graphic, at the countries globally, Russian Federation is the third largest emitter, followed by China, Malaysia, and Mongolia, for example, is also represented here. So maybe also a few countries you would not really expect as important peatland greenhouse gas emitters. At the level of the European Union, we are now even able to show and identify spatially where the emissions come from. So this is again the peatland map of Europe combined with emission factors for the greenhouse gas emissions. And you also can identify hotspots of emissions. Ireland, for example, sticks out, but again, also the Netherlands, Northwest Germany emit a lot of peatland greenhouse gas emissions. The main cause of the emissions is drainage for agriculture. And this is, of course, a historical fact. And in the past, most of us would have simply joined people draining peatlands because it was not clear and it was not known that this would lead to such devastating environmental effects. If we look at these graphics, in the inner circle, we see the proportion of peatland area in the total agricultural land, which is usually small. And the outer circle shows the proportion of peatland greenhouse gas emissions related to agriculture in the total agricultural emissions. And at the European Union scale, it's only 3% of the land, but 1/4, 25% of the emissions related to agriculture. And in many other countries, it's even more dramatic. A small area of land, of agricultural land, emits a very large part of the emissions related to agriculture. So you can also turn it the other way around. It's a very big potential of reducing emissions. So a few insights from this book project with a lot of different peatland scientists from many parts of Europe. All over Europe, peatlands have received much less attention of politics and society than forests. I think you would all agree to this. In Europe, hardly any mires have survived in areas with climatic and edaphic suitability for arable agriculture. You see here a potato field on a drained peatland. This is very typical in those regions. Peatland destruction is mostly not a sneaking process, but the result of concerted and large-scale action. Enormous areas of peatlands have been drained as part of youth campaigns, unemployment relief works, and works of prisoners. So it was not the farmers usually, and it was not just single people. These rapid developments were initially stimulated by the good result in terms of land productivity. Setbacks like soil degradation and subsidence only became apparent decades later, and much of the drainage and damage is irreversible. So far, only 1% of the drained peatland area in Europe has been revetted. Here, for example, a picture from Belarus, one of the front runners in peatland revetting. When launched this book at a side event of the Climate Convention in Bonn, we handed it over to the head of delegation of Indonesia, Nurmas Ripatin, and we also said very clearly, if the South can learn anything from the North, then it is how not to do things. So we can mainly talk about our mistakes, our errors, and what we learned from it. What we know and what we learned is peatland conservation implies primarily the conservation of its hydrology. To conserve a peatland, we have to conserve its entire peat body, and in case of fens, its mineral catchment area. Conservation is much more cost-effective than restoration. And revetting stops subsidence and substantially reduces greenhouse gas emissions as well as nutrient release. Last but not least, if you have to use peatlands, use them wet. So a few key tasks are emerging from this. One is improve the knowledge about the distribution of peatlands. We need to update peatland distribution data. And we need to critically review also the greenhouse gas inventories at a national scale for peat soils, for organic soils. So in this publication, we showed that the European Union is massively under-reporting emissions from drained peatlands to an extent of about 70 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year. We need to improve communication about peatlands. We need to create new images and visions how peatlands can look like. We need to get the numbers right, of course. And what we recently do a lot is to connect with artists. For example, we have just been and still are present at the Biennale in Venice in the pavilion of Chile, of the Chilean pavilion. And they have covered all the floor of this pavilion with peat mosses from one of our study sites. And we think it is very promising to connect more with artists in the field of peatland communication. Of course, also to do infographics to show actually what the situation is like. It is very much about dialogue with people. So you need to talk to people, you need to find allies, you need to cooperate. You cannot revet peatland simply by yourself. So in 2015 to 2019, we organized a German peatland dialogue where we did lots of such meetings. And now we work in model regions. I'm just going today to one of these model regions here. We do a lot of field days, we do landscape walks, we do set up water works of the future, especially with young farmers. And what we also need to do is to translate our overall societal objectives, in particular the Paris Agreement, to peatlands. So in 2019, we created a peatland greenhouse gas pathway for Germany based on the Paris Agreement. And you can see it here. So in the center, we have the IPCC 1.5 degree report curves, how to achieve net zero for CO2. And we combine this with and visualize the condition of peatlands at the moment in Germany. On the left-hand side, much of it is in red, dry, and we need to bring all this area onto a pathway, and in the coming 2 decades rather than 3 decades, revet almost all of this area to achieve net zero. Otherwise, this is simply impossible. And we are also working with partners in other countries to create similar such pathways. For example, it was just done in a work for the Netherlands. We also need to better understand the revetted peatlands. What is clear is already now that we do not get back the old peatlands. They do not get back to their old selves. So in a large meta study, we analyzed 240 near natural and more than 300 revetted fens in Europe. And just a brief glance into the results, we could see that there's quite some difference between the natural ones and the revetted ones. There's an overlap, of course, as well, but we also create, to some extent, novel systems, novel ecosystems. And it is very important to assess then actually the ecosystem services we get from these revetted peatlands. We also need to create capacity and new funding streams. This will all not come by itself. So again, looking at Indonesia, Indonesia does have a peatland restoration agency for some years already. And we are just discussing the creation of such peatland restoration agencies in Germany. We need to bring state funds into natural climate solutions. Again, from Germany, I can tell that the German government just committed itself to spend 4 billion euros in the coming 4 years on natural climate solutions, about half of it on peatlands. And we need to involve the private sector via sponsoring, via carbon credits, via creating paludiculture value chains. And this is also ongoing in many regions here, but still slow. Especially about carbon credits, it is important to build on existing schemes like the MORE futures in Germany, the UK Peatland Carbon Code, and to establish common guiding principles. And together with the UK colleagues, we are working and have worked already on such guiding principles or a kind of meta standard. And we need to combine alternative land use on peatland. So it's clear it's about revetting, but it's also clear it's rather important to have paludiculture as an alternative type of land use and agriculture. But we can also consider in particular drained peatland areas to combine it with solar energy, for example. And first such plants are being set up in some regions of Europe. And we need to engage and shape the policies regarding peatlands. And that was in the last years very much in the European Union, the common agriculture policy, where revetted peatlands used in paludiculture are now regarded as eligible land for subsidies, which is very important. At the moment, it's the carbon farming framework, but also very urgently the nature restoration law. And I think you are aware that the European Commission indicated that at the 22nd of June, they want to release the nature restoration law, and we very much hope and are urging the Commission to include peatlands still in it. And many of your organizations have joined this joint letter that was last week sent to the European Commission. And last but not least, just this remark also because we are concerned about both climate and biodiversity. When we develop paludiculture, we also need a good spatial planning because we should not establish any type of paludiculture on any revetted peatland. And to mix and combine both biodiversity and climate objectives, it is very much advised to create a smart land use planning, where to actually plant paludiculture crops, but also where to only mow the existing vegetation. So that was a short insight into the larger picture of Europe, but also emerging challenges that we have. And I wish you a very successful conference. And yeah, I was happy to join you at least briefly.
Hello, Franziska, Jarek Rogulec, OTOP BirdLife Poland. So you mentioned that it is possible to combine solar energy with the wetland use or wetland rewetting. In Poland, we have problem that already in last years, there is more and more tries the business of the solar energy try to use unused land, which are very often drained peatlands, as a solar energy or solar panel areas. And we rather resist because it's just the peatlands, and when you install solar panels on the peatlands, it will then for many years will be this infrastructure will be on the peatlands. How you can combine it? What are the solutions in Germany which we can learn from Poland to combine first solar energy, which is very important for us, but from other side, protection of the peat in this area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jarek. We have a similar problem. We have already 530 hectares of drained peatlands with solar energy plants. So also there's a strong interest now in to set them up on agricultural land. And this is, of course, the worst you can do, to drain a peatland and then set up a windmill or a solar power plant. That's why I think the only way forward is really to also inform policies that this should not be done. And to actually test how it could look like on a revetted peatland. So we have now, I mean, we have a rather green government at the moment in Germany, and the three green ministries, agriculture, environment, and economics, they have a joint strategy now where they already include solar energy on revetted peatlands. And what we try is to influence this in a way that this would be tested and studied scientifically in parallel, because we still need to better find out and learn, especially how the shading of the peatland changes then also the water regime. So we want to do greenhouse gas measurements also in sites with solar power plants. And not to do it on a too large area. So we proposed also to, for example, in each federal state, only up to 1,000 hectares, for example, not more, not to trigger a development that can actually harm the environment and the biodiversity. And the third key point is that we need to have these spatial maps of peatland, and we propose only to go for the strongly degraded peatlands where any type of paludiculture is allowed. So where it would also be allowed, so that's usually former cropland on peatland. And then I think it's rather safe, what we also see, and that's why we see it as a positive development, because it's really the first time that the large agricultural enterprises get interested in revetting. So far with paludiculture, we could not convince them, clearly. So that's why I think we need to find a balance here.
Okay, thank you. So
yes, so I've met all of you before, so you know my name is Sunna and I work for the Soil Conservation Service of Iceland. And I've been working related to the wetlands since 2016, when, as Björn said, the Soil Conservation Service got appointed the role of wetland restoration. I'm going to talk a little bit about many things, and a lot of it I was also babbling about yesterday. So some of it might be familiar, but maybe in a little bit more structured way. And also I talk a little bit about the history of land use and then restoration. So it's a bit similar to what Björn was talking about, but then you probably will remember it. And I added this slide yesterday, but because of the brightness, you can't really see, because this is kind of a background to the degradation issues we are facing in Iceland, because of land use, the volcanic soil, harsh climate, the Icelandic ecosystems have degraded very, very heavily since settlement in around 1000 or 800 or something. So when the Vikings came, we had birch forest, wetlands, and almost all the area was vegetated. And then they started to chop the trees, graze the areas. So the soil and the vegetation eroded away. And then few centuries further or closer to us, they started to drain the wetlands, the last remaining vegetated areas usually that survived all the previous land use. But you can't see it, so you just have to believe me. Because here you can see it's all eroded away, and then this is the last vegetated area in Reykjavík, and in 1960 something, they went and ditched it all up. Bliksmýri. Yeah, Bliksmýri. Yeah, this is just how it is. But all of you have seen it probably in your travels. And people think this is the natural state of Iceland, but it really isn't. It's the doing of man. So peatlands in Iceland, they cover about 9,000 square kilometers. And you remember the wetland restoration plan for 2026 was quite tiny. So it's not very promising. The peatlands or wetlands, we usually use wetlands for all different kinds. They are of course diverse, dynamic, both between and within. And we mostly have those fen types of mires, as you probably have seen, but also other kinds. Okay, and you saw a little bit about the soil yesterday. Of course, I'm quite obsessed with that because my background is in soil and I don't know anything about birds, as you all know very much about. The soil has considerable mineral inputs, as I told you yesterday, from the erosion and also from just volcanic activities. We have those as layers. And you know, like if you have like wind-borne erosion, the material stops where there's a rough surface, something is stopping it. So like in Bliksmýri that I was trying to show you before, when we dug down, we had like a mineral soil, maybe 50 centimeters, purely mineral. And then beneath there was the organic soil, because since settlement it had acquired so much, or yeah. But often those this mineral matter is an addition to the organic matter, slowly accumulating with the organic matter. So although the percentage of organic matter is quite low, the amount is still very high. But we have so high soil density, favorable pH, and quite good nutrients availability. So when drained, they're usually quite fertile. Yeah, okay, so, and let's check the soil. And those look very nice also in a better, we have better conditions, but those are just soil profiles, not the same as you saw yesterday. This is from intact wetland and this is a drained wetland, and you can just see how the mineral matter starts to accumulate after the settlement layer. So you can see it at our homepage, much nicer. And then there's the flora. Compared to other Icelandic ecosystems, there is high productivity in the wetlands. The vascular plants dominate, and we don't have those sphagnum dominant wetlands. We don't find them, although of course we have sphagnum and a lot of other mosses, as you saw yesterday. As our other ecosystems, our wetlands are quite species poor because we are a very young island, but they are of course habitat to species that are protected and red listed, and also those of course habitat for wetland species, and when we are training them all, they are losing their habitats. And there is this beautiful plant with the horrible name, Horbladka in Icelandic. My favorite plant. Yes, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's much more cuter because hor in Iceland both means bugger, you know, and like hallæri, famine. Okay. Those two negative meanings, so it's not a very nice name.
Fieberklee of Deutsch.
Fever.
Fieberklee. So this is the against fever.
Ah, okay. So
it was used against fever as
It's also called rain steps.
Yeah.
Because they use the roots to tie up the horses.
Yeah. Maybe a bit better. Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
And no, okay, enough about this. So fauna, this I took from a published article because I'm not very much of a bird person. But of course, we don't have any reptiles. We have very few mammals. So mostly those are habitats for birds. And they are particularly important for birds. And our wetlands support many internationally significant bird species and are especially important for waders in the northern hemisphere. And I hope I'm not lying. No, I know this is true because I took it from a published article. And there I also saw that they have quite high breeding density, often 10 times higher than for the same species in the UK, for example. Those are also important, of course, areas for salmonoids, eels, and hot chili, not for the fishes, but we don't really know that much about it, I think, and of course, insects as well. And there is the intensive drainage during the 20th century, along with the introduction of the American mink, is believed to be the reason that this water rail has stopped breeding in Iceland, although it is a guest bird, or what do you call it?
It's seen.
Yeah, it's seen, a very beautiful bird. So Björn talked a little bit about this, but traditionally, those areas were used for haymaking and for grazing, and the peat, as in many other countries, was used as a building material and fuel. We just, like in old days, Icelanders lived in like this mud homes. But as I was talking very much about yesterday, with the arrival of heavy machinery in the Second World War, large-scale drainage began. And at first, just like we saw in SOC, for making hay fields, and then for improving grazing conditions. And also, for example, you could get a subsidy to make a ditch, but not for fencing. So if you wanted to keep your cattle at bay or something, it was more economical, just to dig ditches instead of fencing. So it was heavily subsidized, and of course people didn't know that this was a bad thing, and drainage is still ongoing, and it was very sad traveling around west of Iceland this week, seeing what is happening there. It's done for agriculture, building roads, urban development, and obviously also for forestry or plantations. So half of Icelandic peatlands are impacted by drainage at different level, and that its length, which is quite closely mapped, spans 33,000 kilometers. And as Björn said, only a small portion of the land is used for usage that needs the land to be like dry. And here's just a you can see because while the drainage was subsidized, it was quite well documented, but now we don't know how much is drained each year because no one is like documenting it. So it peaked here around 1970 and then faded away, but it didn't really fade away. They just stopped documenting it. So restoration, first efforts of restoration were initiated by you guys, bird enthusiasts. And the first project was implemented in 1993, very small project, and I'm not really sure where it was. And a wetland committee was appointed in 1996, and their role was somehow to initiate more wetland restoration, develop methods, educate people and stuff like that. And that stopped in 2006. This wetland committee was abandoned in 2006. In following years, numerous pond, lakes and peatlands were restored. Many of the projects initiated by this committee were like ponds and open water projects. But with the release of the IPCC wetland supplement and somehow changing in accounting rules for Iceland, wetland degradation in the context of climate change gained more attention. So in 2016, peatland restoration was included for the first time officially in Iceland's climate action plan, and our institution, mine and Iðun's, were appointed the role of implementing. And since then, many small-scale restoration projects around the island have been implemented. And we really have to like upscale, but it's not going very well, not as well as we would like, of course. In 2017, program of monitoring restoration impacts, like we were doing in SOP, started. We were measuring with key ecosystem factors regularly. And we are still, of course, in a very much of a developmental phase, because this is still a very short period, I think. Yeah. And the implementation itself, we have a mixed success. Everything is just running away. It's a very badly done project in north of Iceland. It was done in the beginning years and with much too little supervision and all kinds during the winter, and everything is just going very, very badly wrong. And also it's a ownership, it's also like a social issue. They are not happy, don't want to fix it, or something like that, the landowners. And it's a complicated ownership of this land. And then we have better success at many other sites. And of course, we are getting better at implementing. But peatland rewetting is still very much viewed as just blocking or infilling ditches. So it's like just arrive with the excavator and do the job and then leave and don't ever come back. It's still, yeah. So here are just some pictures that, oh, oops. You don't understand this. This is a very nice project in east of Iceland. This is quite an important bird area in Djúpivogur. I don't know, probably no one has been there. And I'm not sure how well this holds. This is the, you don't see it very well maybe. Because of course we have heavy like rain in the fall, and we have also like the snow melt in spring, and then during the winter we have this continuous circle of freezing and thawing, freezing and thawing. So it's quite a harsh conditions. And we also have quite large ditches, I think.
And we are looking at blockage there. Here, in the corner.
Yeah.
That could like.
Yeah, could. I would be afraid. Yeah.
This is blocked with soil.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we haven't tried any other methods.
Yeah.
Only very cheap soil.
Yeah, but it's very good.
Yeah, can be very effective. Just do it the proper way. But I want to show you also a picture from the project that was done the first year. And we were doing this, and again, you don't see it very well. But here we have like a ditch that's blocked very well. All the vegetation were used above ground, but here they used like a ita. So with a bulldozer. Yeah, bulldozer. Horrible.
And this is excavated.
Yeah. And yeah, and it's very sad because this is the president's place. Yeah, yeah.
Well, not a course.
Yeah, because this is since 2016, so we go and follow how it's changing. And the president has a very good land manager, so he's always like, if something is starting to run off, he stops it, and this is all covered in moss now. Okay. This is a strange kind of soil at this site, because it's so close to the sea. We get sea sometimes over it, a lot of birds, so a lot of nutrient inputs.
Too small.
It's, yeah, and of course you can, and you can't do it properly with, bulldozer, because you can't like press it properly or anything. And of course you can't choose where the vegetation goes, you just, And then another picture, this is also from SOC. This is just in June 2019, and then this is in September 2019 after restoration. So you could possibly see like how the infill is differently deep and how it was much more bare just after. And then there is also a drone image of SOC since last summer, August. And just, yeah. Also, you can see it very well, but this is a picture of a very badly done site that I don't think it's possible to save. So then I was thinking yesterday, what have we learned? At least we know that it's very important to study site conditions and characteristics before restoration. You can't just come and do something without really knowing the site. Where is the water flowing, how everything is behaving. But this is all just common sense, of course. Always work with the land according to site conditions, everything. And learn from previous mistakes. Don't just keep on doing the same ones. And we are still learning not to underestimate the slope, because it seems to be quite flat and then it's steep and everything goes wrong. And also the amount of water during autumn and spring, because usually we are during the summer studying the sites. And we are also trying to...
Yes, you are now the forward. Okay, thank you.
And now we have come on. Ég held ég hafi fælt eina óvart.
Yeah, that's okay, I'm just only going to do it. But I found it at least interesting. So this is the like measured CO2 emissions at all the 4 sites before restoration and correlated with the vegetation type. And then when we took all the annual budgets for each monitoring plot, not site, and the correlation with water level, we can see that if we raise the water level by 10 centimeters, although it's not very high correlation, we can reduce the emissions by 0.4 grams per cubic meter, no, not cubic, square meter per day. And last slide, just because Nick was asking about it yesterday, I added this. So we are trying to do this analysis for the whole of Iceland, where you can somehow identify the areas, the degraded areas that have the most potential for climate and biodiversity. So we only use already published data that is geo-referenced as well. And we are not gathering any data at all. And the factors that we are using, positive ones, that areas close to a valuable habitat type, So because the drained areas often are given some habitat type of a hayfield or something like that. So we can't use the habitat type with the drained area. That's a positive. Close to a natural open water, like a lake or a pond, is a positive value. Close to where endangered and red listed species are found. And I was not sure how to translate this: size and continuum. We want to get big areas and we want to connect areas as well. There's a positive value to be within a classified important bird area, and also with the habitat types, we add value to habitat types that are specially listed as important for birds. And we want to see carbon-rich soil at the sites. And this is still a very much work in progress. Negatives are, there were only two that I remember. Maybe there are more. Close to a forest plantation, because there is a study that shows they don't want to be close to a forest, and close to roads. So those are negative, give negative values. So then we add it all up. And what is still to come are the socio and economic factors. Ownership, land use, conservation status, and some other stuff that we are going to add. So, for example, if an area is close to a very important bird area, is close to a pond, but is used as a hayfield or for barley, producing barley, it gets negative for the land use because it's very unlikely that we can restore it. And so areas that are green are quite favorable for restoration, but when they are red, they're not as favorable. So we are hoping when this is ready, we can just see whom we should buy this land or something like that. This is very important. At least, and maybe it could be, we could use it as a tool for, yeah.
We also have been calling.
Yeah.
Like approaching them.
Yeah, but also like, we get, not our colleague, but a lady that we are working with at the environmental agency, she took this demo type to the environmental minister and said you definitely have to friðlýsa þetta, and then we're going to restore it, conserve this for future restoration. And it seems to be working. In Loðmundarfjörður, one of the most, it's a very well known example in Iceland, where they drained the whole valley and all the people moved away and it got deserted. And we very much want to restore it. Yes, so, and lastly, I think the only beautiful picture of intact wetlands. This is also quite close to Mývatn, but in the highlands, huge area. Very, very nice, very beautiful. Me and Iðunn went there last year and Iðunn took this picture. We were very impressed. And there is no protection status on this area, which is, I think is crazy. Yeah, so thank you.
It could be like this.
Hi. Now, Pavel, you may just, it's better that you just introduce yourself. And,
okay. I'm working for one of the Polish NGOs, Naturalist Club Poland. My organization is one of the actors active in pit box restoration in Poland. As you will see, because I will present also some information about our project. Thank you very much for invitation to Iceland and the possibility to present you some summary, some overview of the problems of peatlands rewetting in Poland. How to change the slide? That okay. As a very synthetic background, it is about 1,300,000 hectares of peatlands in Poland. 92% are fence. Most of them are eutrophic fence. Only 8% are ombrotrophic box, which are supplied in water by rain. But about 95% of the peatlands is are degrading by draining. Polish peatlands were drained consecutively from the 19th century to with the more intense draining in the half of the 20th century. Now the draining is almost stopped, but the draining systems are still usually maintained by farmers, because about 90% of Polish peatlands are used by farmers as the wet meadows. Only minority of the Polish peatlands are the wastelands, which are not used, and this, of course, are the easier to be restored. Generally, we have now the comprehensive database of peatlands, that all the numbers here are estimations only. We have the old database from the 70s years of the 20th century, concerning only peatlands bigger than 1 hectare. This is not all, because high number of peatlands in Poland are very small peatlands in the forest or in the farmland landscapes. We have no updated database that we must based on estimations. What are the restoration needs from the point of view of climate? We have a rather recent estimation by Kotowski from the last year. It was concluded that we have in Poland now 1,200,000 drained peatlands, emitting annually 30 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. It is important. Poland is in the first 10 of worst emitters in the world for greenhouse gases from degraded peatlands. Emission may be reduced by the rewetting peatlands by 21.7 million tons of equivalent annually. It is also important, it is significant percent of the general Polish emission. But till now, we have no systematic approach to the peatland restoration and rewetting. Also, we have no systematic approach for this from the climatic point of view. We have only a draft of the National Strategy of Wetlands, National Strategy for Wetlands, which was prepared under the frame of Ramsar Convention, which is very ambitious in comparison to the past efforts, but not very ambitious comparing with the needs. The strategy assumed to restore till the 2030 about 300,000 hectares of degraded peatlands. It means about 1/3 of the area which in fact should be restored to maximize the impact, peatlands impact for climate. But our present achievements are very small comparing with the needs. Only several projects of peatlands restoration and rewetting are implemented. We have no comprehensive database of this project because peatlands restoration and rewetting till now was not organized systematically by the state. It is rather grassroots activity implemented by several independent actors. Most of them are NGOs. Important actors are also Polish state forests. Important actors are also nature conservation authorities, but no one summarized the restored area in total. we achieve not more than 20,000 hectares till now, which means nothing in comparison to the need. And the most important problem is that the present achievements are focused on the easy restorable cases only, which means it is focused on the peatlands which are state-owned, not used by the farmers, usually considered as wasteland, that the restoration is not in conflict in someone interests. Upscaling is the most important challenge of the peatlands restoration in Poland, but upscaling means not only increasing of the area. Upscaling means also that we need to face the problem we have not in the past experience, or the problem which was very limited in our past experience. Several projects was implemented, but under the various names. Not of them are named as peatland restoration. Some of them are named, for example, improving habitat for something, that it is not very easy to summarize the achievement. It needs the general knowledge about Polish nature conservation and activities of particular actors. But as we can estimate this, the number about 20,000 hectares is probably the most accurate one. The information is dispersed, but I will try to summarize some experience with the restoration process. And I would like to show you some examples of such restoration projects. Maybe first of them, which should be mentioned here, is the experience of the Center of Wetlands Conservation. This is one of the Polish NGOs working with wetlands. Starting from Bagno Całowanie, it's the English translation is the bog, the kiss, located near Warsaw. It is probably one of the oldest project of peatlands reweting in Poland. Of course, the implementation method was typical one. It was the ditches blocking, but also the experiment with the topsoil removal was implemented there to restore the peat forming vegetation. But this experience was implemented under rather strong stakeholder conflict, because it was implemented on the part of the bog which are not used by farmers, but farmers use the neighboring parts. Then the farmers generally oppose against peatland rewetting and dip the ditches back to their lands. Finally, the project do not prevent consecutive degradation of this mire. Now the natural values of the Bagno Całowanie almost disappeared, at least from the botanic point of view. There are still some values related to the birds of the wet meadows, but the peat forming process disappeared there. But this experience is important as one of the first in Poland. There is the wide experience of my organization, Naturalist Club Poland, but related rather to raised bog in the northern part of Poland. Several thousand ditches was blocking, but this project implemented as the first live project implemented in Poland. But this project targets rather easy restorable cases, because it targets rather the mires in the forest landscape and mires which are managed by the state forests, but the Polish foresters are generally don't interested in afforesting mires. They even are interested in nature conservation to some extent, that the collaboration with the foresters was very good. And my personal opinion is that Polish foresters are clearly aliens in the mire conservation if restoration, if the mire is without trees. Now, We have wide experience on techniques of ditches blocking, monitoring, processing administrative and logistic issues, but smaller experience with stakeholders management in that project because the stakeholder situation was very simple. But there are also other restoration projects implemented by Naturalist Club. For example, the Two Life project for restoration alkaline fence, which was in general the Mayas with much more complicated hydrology and much more complicated stakeholder relationships. What is important here, we try to use close to nature ditches blocking techniques as the planting sedges in the ditches to let them to grow and block the outflow. It was close to nature, that is good from the nature point of view, but the advantage is also that the close to nature techniques don't need so hard administrative burden as the building something. It's very important because the problems with legal procedures are important problem in peatland rewetting in Poland. We also implement the project of restoration of something like raised bog and forested bogs with the bog forest in Słowiński National Park. It was out of scope of the state forest. It is national park. That's the objectives was clear also for the landowner, as the national park is designated only for nature conservation. It was the first project implemented in Poland under the climatic justification. It was the part of the multinational live peat restore project implemented in several countries: the Germany, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. It was the first project in Poland in which we try to estimate the climatic impact and the greenhouse gases fluxes by measurements of the fluxes and application of the gas methodology. It was not very big. It concerned about 900 hectares and blocked the ditches in about 300 points. What should also be mentioned, it is also the experience of the northeastern Polish Bird Conservation Association, which is very various concerning the habitats targeted, from raised bogs to peat meadows, and from single state ownership sites to complex stakeholders management. There is also interesting the BirdLife Poland experience in various projects. With the in the home fence, it is yet about 30 years old. It was implemented mainly for bird habitats and target mainly wet meadows, but because the birds need meadows and meadows need mowing, generally most of the sites need compromise between grazing and mowing and the real peatland restoration, because in fact the peatland restoration is, at least to some extent, contradictory to the use of the peatlands as meadows. The farmers usually want to decrease the water level, at least in several periods of the year when they need to go with the implementation of the mowing of meadows. There is also interesting experience of Polish state forests, because Polish state forests implement the big project of so-called water retention in the forests. They are focused mainly on keeping the water and water retention. That's most of the actions was the building ponds, but in several cases the foresters also implement the water retention by the restoration of mares inside the forest. It means the water retention in the pit, and there are several significant achievements. For example, one of the forest districts in Poland, the forest district Strzałowo in the Mazurian Lakeland, is the example of, in fact, restoring all was restorable in the scope of the forest district. Next example may be the life project implemented in Janowskie Forest by the Regional Conservation Authority under the name In Harmony with Nature, which improve the conservation status of bog forest on the pit, also by rewetting of the peatland and blocking the outflow, building the dams, blocking the ditches. The next experience is the experience of Biebrza National Park in the upper Biebrza Valley, life project implemented by the national park, improving conservation status of about 50 hectares of wetlands by building about 15 dams, blocking the water outflow in 15 points. But here, rather the facilities which allow to regulate the water level was implemented, because the project was implemented in agricultural landscape with complex ownership problem, and the park could not do what they want, because they must find a compromise with the interest of the farmers on the neighborship parcels. There is also important Campinos National Park effort concerning mainly eutrophic fence, because the Campinos forest is near the Warsaw. The structure of landscape, it is the belts of the dunes, and between belts of the dunes are afforested by pine forests, but between the belts of the dunes are belts of the alder cars and wet meadows. The project, what is interesting, it was implemented in the landscape scale. The thinking is that we need not only to restore the individual peat bog, but we want to restore the landscape functioning and the water functioning in the landscape. For example, to restore the alder cars as the source of water supply for our wetland ecosystem in the park. But it was implemented in the very complex hydrological situation and in a very complex stakeholders environment. It is the ongoing life project which is just implemented. It is only the I cannot present all project which was implemented in Poland, but it is the selection of that one which I find as probably the most important. What I experience? The main experience is that in fact, the problems vary from site to site, and that peatlands rewetting is in fact a very complex issue. There are not two the same peat bogs, each is different, and we have the full spectrum of problems covered by the implemented project, and maybe even more problems will be identified in the future. We will go to upscaling of the restoration effort. For example, we have the full gradient of complexity of human interest, from very simple situation when we have the one owner or partner which is also interested in biodiversity, as the national park, as the conservation authority, as some forest district of national forests. It is in fact a very easy situation to restore the peatlands. Clear and full restoration is possible, and in fact the implementing of restoration project in such consortium, in such collaboration, is rather easy. Also the financing until now seems do not be a barrier in Poland. If you have the good restoration project, good restoration application, you can apply for money, of course with some problems, but after some efforts, you are almost sure that you will receive the money from funds or national or European as life. But you must have the project prepared before in the application state. And in fact, the problem of our restoration is that so easy restorable peat box are finished. Some months ago, I was asked to be a partner in the next restoration project, but the question to me is, can I find the appropriate box? Finally, I find, but on the other, in the other part of Poland, it was the collaboration with the BirdLife Poland for Orava peat box. I cannot find the closer one, yeah, because there are no more easy situation. In each remaining situation, in 99% of needs, the complexity of interest is much more complex. Sometimes it is also the single owner or partner, but which bit more complex interest, not only interested in biodiversity as the national forest. Generally, the foresters like the nature conservation as a greenwashing of forestry, and they are very happy if someone implement the nature conservation inside the forest, in the state forest ownership, but not influencing the forest, of course. Situation is sometimes may be complicated because sometimes the restoration of the bog need to influence the forest on the edges, yeah, and then the foresters are not always happy. Sometimes there is a single owner, but neutral in interest, as for example the local community. For them, the bog is kind of wasteland. Then they are able to agree, okay, let's do that restoration. We don't need the bog for nothing. But even there, they are usually they need something additional incentive, as for example the tourist infrastructure to be developed. But they are still rather simple cases. Most of the cases are much more complicated. For example, several owners with conflict interests, or even multi-interest cases, or even clearly contradictory interests. The most of situation with the farmers are situation of at least partly contradictory interests, because the farmers generally want to maintain the draining of the peatland, at least in specific part of the year, which of course influence negatively the effect of the restoration. Then in the more complex part of this spectrum, a lot of compromise and additional incentives for partners is usually necessary in other projects. Sometimes the ownership problem makes the restoration in fact impossible. This is one of the examples of the peat box on the Orava, with about 500 of owners and 500 of parcels with the very narrow belt. This is due to the history of the local families, generation and legacies. And each owner owned the 2 meters wide parcel. And in fact, we cannot identify a lot of that owners because, for example, the owner go to Chicago and no one has the contact to them. This is rather common situation. In fact, there is no official path to manage such problem. The only which I can imagine is a kind of guerrilla strategy. It means block the ditches, rewet the peatland, and wait who will be opposed. But it is of course not the solution for the official institution. Yeah. Due to the gradient of interest conflict, there is also the gradient of so-called restoration strictness. If the situation is easy, we can implement full rewetting, restoration of original hydrology, and try to restore the original peat-forming vegetation. But it is the ideal situation, which is rare indeed. Of course, in such situation, we can achieve effective both biodiversity as the climate impact. In many cases, we can make the peatlands permanently wet, but not as wet as original, because we must consider other interests as the farmers in neighborhood, which cannot be influenced on their land. In most of cases, we need to find a compromise as the making the peat bog wet, but temporarily only, with accepting temporal drainage for hay harvesting. But of course, each of such compromise diminish the effect of the restoration and diminish at least climate impact. In fact, the climate impact of such restoration became ambiguous. In many cases, it's not diminished biodiversity effect, because in many cases, we want to maintain biodiversity related to wet meadows, which may be fully successful, but from the climate point of view, such restoration is not very ambitious and not very effective. There are the different approach to the issue of preliminary study. Some project was implemented on the base of the intuition. If there is the ditch, let's block it. And in fact, it works. In many cases, it works, and in many cases, it works well. Some other projects are preceded by the very advanced study of the hydrology, vegetation, hydrological modeling, contracting the expertise to find the best point of blocking ditches. Very often the conclusion of such a very advanced research is that there is the necessity of blocking ditches. Of course, a lot of time, money, and skills are necessary for doing this, but the conclusion very often is the same as the intuitive one. But not everywhere and not in every case. There are several kinds of bogs, as for example, the alkaline fen, when the proper recognition of the parameters and sources of water supply is very, very important for the restoration. In many other cases, for example, recognition of the bog history, as the answer to the question, was the bog afforested in the past or rather open, is very important for planning the conservation actions. In such cases, the preliminary study are indeed necessary. The most difficult point is to recognize the both situation. Sometimes there is also the problem of application for money, because the situation is that if we are going to do preliminary study, it is of course possible to fund also the preliminary study, but as a part of the project of restoration. In the same application, we must apply for concrete restoration measures, which means that, in fact, the very often strategy is the strategy to guess and confirm, which means some like intuitive approach to block the ditches, then make the preliminary studies, sometimes very advanced, which confirm the initial assumption, maybe modify a bit, but not modify more than the founder can accept. This is also the different approach to the prediction of the expected water level changes. As I said, sometimes it is by intuition only. Sometimes we try to implement the advanced water level modeling using the various kind of mathematical hydrology models. In the project which I have presented, for example, the surface flow model was used, which of course it is not appropriate at all to bogs. Sometimes the ditches flow model are used. Sometimes the most advanced, the pit percolation and ditches outflow models are used in the preliminary study. But the problems with models is that a lot of assumptions are usually necessary for each of that model, Those model accuracy is usually limited, but models looks fine and can very improve significantly stakeholders communication. For example, it is an example of the modeling of the change of the water table in the Słowiński National Park in the dry year. It means in the dry year we can achieve nothing. In the normal year, maybe something on one of the box, but in the wet year, we can achieve important improvement of the water level on the box, but not influence the water level on the meadows which are between the box and which are used by the farmers. I don't believe the accuracy of that modeling is very high, but this picture I have perfectly used for discussing with stakeholders, because I can show them, look, here is the hydrology model prepared by the best specialist in Poland, which show that I will keep the water on the bog and the water will not flow to your meadow. Yeah, that the models in fact are very useful, but not always for real modeling, but sometimes even more useful for stakeholders communication. Of course, they are also the valuable approach to the blocking of the water outflow. Sometimes the regulated facilities are implemented, sometimes the permanent ditches blocking. Of course, the permanent allow to permanent rewetting. The regulated are necessary if we are going to make active management of the water. But if we are going to active manage of the water level, there are a set of important questions. Who will do it in the future? In whose interest it will be done in the future? We must think also about the not only about the project scale of the implementation, but also about 10, 20, 30 years in the future, and must find appropriate answer of that question. Of course, in that situation of using the regulated facility, water managing facilities, the permanent maintenance of the facilities is necessary, which also need the permanent funding for them. And important question is how to secure the funds for the maintaining of the project sustainability. It's not easy question, because each funder rather easily get the money for one-off implementation of the project, but no one wants to fund the permanent recurrent actions as the monitoring, maintenance, and the continuation of the water management. Of course, the location of the ditches blocking points is various. Sometimes the rewetting projects are only the blocking of the ditch in single points, which is of course simple and cheap, but in many cases not very effective, because usually the slope of the peatlands are not the horizontal. For example, on the raised bogs are cupola-like. The alkaline fans are often on the slope. Only some eutrophic fans are really flat. In such, if the bog surface is not flat, the approach to block the water outflow in single points is simply not appropriate to that situation. That in many cases we try to block the ditches in a lot of dispersed points. It is sometimes it is necessary indeed due to peat bog character. Such approach is also much more resistant, because the breaking out of the one of the dam don't cancel the blocking ditches at all, and is less sensitive for the choice of the location of the points. In fact, it's not the matter if they block here or here. That's the advanced modeling and finding the most appropriate places is not necessary if we assume to do it in many points. Of course, the techniques of the outflow blocking are various. There is the full spectrum for the close to nature techniques, to concrete facilities. Sometimes we try to mimic of natural structures, for example, building the earth or peat dams, but they are not very resistant for water flow, in particular in the spring. In many cases, we underestimate the strength of the water current in the spring, and in many cases, such simple peat dams was disappeared after some years. There was decomposed by the flowing water. Sometimes, in fact, the most often solution is probably the building the wooden structure, the wooden dams. Sometimes the very resistant concrete water managing facilities are necessary. Of course, it is related to the formal bureaucratic burden which is necessary for implementing close to the nature facilities. Usually only a small administrative effort is necessary. For building something as the concrete facility, usually we need applicate to full building permit, which is very resource consuming because we must start from the preparing the very detail of the map of the ditch as an element of the building blueprint. I say that in Polish restoration project we use the full spectrum, but in fact we don't use the full spectrum with comparison to the world spectrum of the naturalness of the ditches blocking techniques. For example, in the United States, mimics of the beaver dams are one of the approach which is sometimes implemented. There is also the special manual for low-tech process-based restoration of riverscapes, which also is useful for blocking the ditches. Till now, we don't try to mimic the beaver activities in Poland, but maybe we will try to do in one of our next projects. On the other side of the spectrum is use the plastic. For example, this is the example from Petri Store in Lithuania. The plastic box are very often used in Europe as the technique of the blocking ditches. Till now, we don't use the plastic in box rewetting in Poland, but I cannot predict what will be in the future. There is also the question of the vegetation, accompanying vegetation management. In some projects, the restoration is one of intervention and is only the rewetting and let vegetation to develop spontaneously. It is, of course, the best solution if possible, and if there are no related, for example, biodiversity interest of specific vegetation kind. But in many peat bog restoration projects, some kinds of vegetation management intervention are implemented parallelly to the rewetting. Sometimes it is one-off trees removing. One-off trees removing is kind of cancelling the lobe of evapotranspiration of water. Because if trees appears on the bog, they evapotranspirate a lot of water. The bog is drier. The trees feel better, evapotranspirate even more water, the bog is drier. Yeah, it is the lobe. Sometimes we need to cancel the lobe by cutting trees and removing trees from the bog. But it is, in fact, looks terrible for some years, but it is in fact not very intensive intervention because it is one of. Of course, sometimes it must be followed by the removing of the tree sprouts. But on many bogs, there are the biodiversity interest or farmer interest to maintain use the peat bog as a meadow. In such situation, the continuation of mowing or grazing is necessary. Sometimes also the biodiversity interest supports such approach. It is in fact very intense because it is consecutive, it is recurrent for everywhere in fact. we never cannot achieve the situation that we can say that the peat bog is restored, because we must still continue to do something with them. Sometimes very, very intense but one-off intervention as the topsoil removing are implemented. In fact, it is still a very experimental approach, implemented, for example, in Bagnocałowanie in Poland. But sometimes the removing of the topsoil on a strongly degraded bed, it is probably the only possibility to restore the kind of peat-forming vegetation and peat-forming processes in the longer future. Concerning the discussion with foresters and the problem of trees on bogs and the issue, what is the better from the climatic point of view. This is the model for the bogs in Slovinsky National Park and different scenario. The green line is a simulated carbon storage by the typical forest on the mineral ground. Of course, if the trees grow, the carbon is accumulated in the biomass, but finally the possibilities of the forest are limited and the equilibrium, something like an equilibrium, will be achieved. By contrast, the natural bog will remove the carbon from atmosphere slower, but consecutively, and there is no limit for them. Probably the bog capacity to remove the carbon may become bigger than the forest about after 250 years. But the question is, what about there is a forest on the bog now? The forest is degrading the bog. And the scenario is that forest will be accumulate the carbon in the tree's biomass, but the forest will be the reason of the degradation of the peat. And probably the black line is the scenario. It is the temporal positive effect from the point of view of the carbon balance. But after about 100 years, it became very negative. Then, in fact, we try to implement the red line scenario, remove trees from the bog. The trees are left near the bog to decompose naturally, and then we try to restore the bog possibility to remove carbon by peat forming. After about 130 years, this scenario became better than the maintaining of the forest, also from the climatic point of view. This is our answer for the foresters' idea to remove carbon by trees and forests. This model is based on the real data from Slovinsky National Park. But sometimes, for the calculating of the climatic effect, we must consider the ecosystem respiration, methane emission, and of course the process of photosynthesis and peat forming. Usually, the peat bog in the natural peat bog, the process of accumulation is bigger than the process of the emission. But of course, it is quite normal, quite usual. This is the equilibrium for each bog, which is considered if we consider the climate impact of the bog restoration. But if we consider the removing of the biomass, we must consider also removed biomass in the calculation. For example, if we maintain the meadow, we must use in calculation also the carbon in the biomass of the annually removed high. It means that if we implement the bog rewetting with the removing of the biomass, the climatic effect of this will be not as big as we achieve. Because if we abandon this, is the error if in our calculation. Of course, even we can achieve the maintaining of the carbon in the peat, we can achieve maybe a slightly positive balance of the by the peat forming, but we still will have the important output of the carbon by by annually harvested biomass. There is always a problem of the water level monitoring in the restoration project, and also there is the full variation of the approaches. From monitoring by the impression only, I have visited the bog after the 2 years, and I see that there is more water than before. It works, why not? But on the other, the other approach is very advanced measurement by installing piezometers with the diverse automatic recording of the water level, which is of course expensive and resource consuming because they need the maintenance and data collection. But in many cases, so advanced measurements is important for understanding what happens. Sometimes the effect of the measurement are not so easy for interpretation, but sometimes they provoke the question. For example, what is the surface of the pit bog, and is the surface stable? Look at the recording of the water table. That fan, in fact, was overflowed by the beavers, but only temporarily, because the level of the surface after some years flow up, and the water level in relation to the surface of the pit bog was in fact optimal for the pit forming. But we can see this result only because we have the diver installed in relation to the bog surface. If we would have installed the piezometer and diver, which is anchorage in the under the bog, we will achieve quite different result, because we will probably achieve that the overflowing is still continuing. That the first question is, what means the surface of the pit bog? Sometimes the difference between water regime are not necessary to recognize, and we never recognize the differences as a result of single observation. Simple go to the bog and look how wet it is. For example, these are two bogs which are similar, with a very similar vegetation, but the water level here is very, very stable. This is the period is the same, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Here is the water level is very stable. Here is the water regime, very typical for bigger raised bog in Poland, which means the optimal water level in spring and summer, and depression in the late summer and autumn. You can see here that something wrong is on that bog. It is not all this is before restoration, because the depression are longer and deeper. But we cannot notice this change if we make only the single observation, even if we make the observation annually, but in the wet period. Yeah. Then, in fact, the second question is what it means the effect of the water level increasing. There is nothing as water level, stable water level in the pit bog. We can consider the average water level, but we can rather consider the whole water regime of the pit bog to say about effect of our restoration. Sometimes there are the annual cycles of the water level. Sometimes there are the clearly long-term changes. Most of such changes we can detect only if we implement the really good water level monitoring. Sometimes, as you see, the small changes are not easy to detect. Here, for example, you can see the rather fast reaction of the water level in the bog for the rain period, but that bog don't reflect rain period at all. It is also the specific of the hydrology of both sites, which is in fact very important for future restoration of them. There is also a similar question for vegetation monitoring, from impression only to very advanced approach as the repeated vegetation mapping and permanent plots. and a lot of problems related to them, as the location of the plots, as the marking of the plots in the field, as the scale using to vegetation assessment, as the credibility of repetition of the observation is there indeed the same point. A very important problem is also the climate impact estimation, which is the new fashion. Of course, we start the thinking about restoration for biodiversity. Now we think also about peat bog restoration for climate. Sometimes the climate impact is not considered at all. Sometimes we try to make advanced assessment of them. There are in fact 3 approaches implemented till now in Poland. The most advanced is direct measurements. It is very expensive, provide real result, real number, but of course this real number are still considered one point of the peat bog only. There are also the attempts to use the guest approach, which means the vegetation, kind of vegetation mapping, kind of guest unit mapping, and calculating by factors related to each unit, or rather similar, but even the simplest and more raw, using the IPPC factors from the wetland annex to the report. Generally, we have no good methodology for estimate of the climate impact of restoration of particular bogs. I thought we probably can do it reasonably with the scale of the country, of the region, and the strategies, but in fact we cannot do it in the scale of single site. Of course, there is also the problem of adaptive approach in the future. It is rather easy to implement one-off restoration. It is rather easy to find the fund for them, but most of cases need the consecutive monitoring and adjusting of the blocking of the water outflow, which in fact is recurrent work. The most often restoration cases are the implementation of the single project. In many sites we have the consecutive project, which in fact means the site managing, but still by the project. What would be the ideal situation, but never achieved till now in Poland? It is the site managing with relevant resources available without necessity of application for them. General problem is the financing permanent efforts, as for example monitoring or maintenance of something, and necessity of presentation of success to the donor, and necessity of achieving declared indicators, which in fact make results, presentation of monitoring results, and make the presentation of the results of the restoration not so credible as it should be in the ideal world. What was achieved in the project? Sometimes simple more water and related vegetation changes, which in fact were rather unpredictable. Sometimes there was the significant negative effect as the eutrophisation. It is usually after the rewetting of the phosphorus-rich peat bogs, or the, for example, development of the unified red rush. Sometimes we can achieve significant results as the stop degradation of peat-forming vegetation. It was achieved, for example, for many raised bog, which the situation now is indeed better than before the restoration. We have the many examples of successful stopping of the peat bog degradation, but until now we have no clear example when we achieve the successful restoration of peat forming process. Till now we have only some promising results, as for example promising results of the reintroduction of sphagnum on the surface of bare peats, some promising results as the better vegetation after the rewetting and restoration, but we still lack the clear confirmation by scientific method that the peat forming processes was restored in the cases it was stopped before restoration. But probably it needs much more time than the time which we spent for bog restoration till now in Poland. Thank you very much.
You have a question?
One technical question, if possible. You have mentioned the matter of deforestation on the big walks, and you said that you just like put those like logs aside for them to become natural.
Yes, but please remember that we implement this in national park.
I see, but would it be possible some more sustainable way to utilize them in order to preserve this solid matter? Like for instance, put them under the water.
Theoretically would be, but we have no appropriate water.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we will just take a break now. 15 minutes, and we will start again 15 minutes from now.
And now, in accordance to our program, we'll see and hear the presentation by Irina Kashpey from Belarus, and the title of the presentation is Peatland Rewetting in Belarus and Manager's Perspective. Irina, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you. Hello.
So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Could you
Can I share the screen? Yeah, just a second. Okay. So a little bit about the area. I was the project manager of the Białowieżska Puszcza Conservation Program, and this is the area I will talk mostly about today. So you probably all know that this is the huge ancient forest on the border between Belarus and Poland. And on the Belarusian side, it covers 150,000 hectares, of which forest is 117,000 hectares. It's very rich in biodiversity terms, containing more than 1,000 species of flora and more than 12,000 species of fauna. So it is a very unique area and very nice also to work in. And we've done a lot in the previous years of our project, and I will tell you what exactly. So first, a few words about the Białowieżska Puszcza Conservation Program. It was funded in 2012, so we were about to celebrate 12 years of our work. In our project, we had three main blocks, three main areas that we covered. The one I'll talk about today mostly is the ecosystem restoration, one of the most important and substantial part of our work. Also, it is a public outreach. As we all know, there is not much you can do without telling to the public, without telling them why it is important to work in nature conservation, and also show the results of your work. We used to work both with the general public, like schools or the local populations, and also the local forestries to know the importance of our work. And also the ecosystem and species monitoring was the third big chunk of our work, because of course, after you're restoring the ecosystem, you have to monitor to see what changes are being done in years, and also to see how it affects the species. So we had a program on studying wolves, lynxes, bats, birds, badgers, for example, and some other species. But in this presentation, as it is a conference about the restoration, I will talk about the first aspect, the ecosystem restoration. So this is the very peculiar map you see on the screen. On the left side, it is a hydrological network that used to be in Puszcza about 100 years ago in 1930s. And just in 70 years after that, in beginning of 2000 years, you've seen how much this hydrological network increased. So many areas were drained for many reasons, actually. The most important of them, of course, is for agricultural use, but also for transporting the logs and to increase the land for the game species, for example. So in those years of this drainage, not much attention was paid to the consequences that could come after this substantial work that has been done. But eventually, people started to see that the ecosystem has changed, and also the forest started to dry out. And the last year, we found maps in Białorusska Puszcza, really old maps that showed us the plans for the for the drainage in Białorusska Puszcza. And it was supposed to be much bigger than you see on the right side. And due to the fact that people saw the unwanted consequences of that work, they, God bless, stopped or more or less slowed down the work on the drainage of the Białorusska Puszcza. But anyway, we still have lots of consequences that we have to deal with at this time. And you see it on the right, which is not supposed to be so. With a matter of time, people and scientists, they found out that the dynamics of the groundwater levels and the dynamics of the average monthly precipitation in the national parks have severely dropped in years. And so people understood finally that they have to do something with that. But for those for who these facts were not substantial enough, for the foresters, for example, there is another good aspect that the forest drying out, the forest desiccation really increased to enormous levels, especially in the beginning of this century. So even the foresters now understand the importance of the water regime restoration, and they're getting more and more involved in our job, which is really pleasant for us, nice to do. Okay, here is the map of what we've done and what we're supposed to do this and a couple of the next years. So in green, you see the areas that we have restored in these years, and in yellow are the areas that we were supposed to restore this in a couple of next years. So I will, do you see my arrow on the screen? I don't know, but in case you do, I will lead you through the few objects that we've restored, the most important ones, the biggest ones, and I will tell you how we've done so. So one is on the north. This is the forest drainage channel system Żarkowщина, and a few here in the middle of the national park. Okay. So there are two main type of sites we do restore. One of them is the straightened rivers, and in our work we've done 4 kilometers of the straightened river Salominka, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and also the drained mires and forests. I combine them in one sector because more or less, even though they are different, these types of ecosystems, they're a similar approach to restoring them. And in the years of our program, we've restored more than 3,200 hectares in Białowieżska Puszcza. Okay, so a bit about the remeandering of restoring the straightened rivers. We have an experience of working on Salominka River, which was straightened for the transportation of logs in the last century. And on this picture, you can quite clearly see on the left, there is a canal, drainage channel, and on the right, there is an old meander, right? This curves, beautiful ones. So the work is to stop somehow the water from going to the channel and lead it across the old meanders, directed that direction. And to do that, we've built dams like this. They're part the wooden carcass and the soil inside that will block the water on the way and force it to go the other direction that it's supposed to be in the like when it used to be normal. So in a few years, we've seen a really nice effect of this, because I think this picture was taken a year ago. So you see the water is already in the old meander a lot. It kind of washes away its way. And there are very nice effects of this restoration. So this work was performed by handmade, let's say, because the river is mostly situated in the core zone of national park with a high density of trees, and it is not possible to bring there any tractors or any excavators. So people used to do that with their bare hands during the whole season. We invited volunteers for that work, and people are really willing to help. So it's a nice part of our job. Okay, let's move on to the drainage channels on the Maes. So this is one of our biggest objects. It's called Dikke Nikker Mire. As you can see, this is the result of, so this work has been done in 2017, and the pictures are from the last year. So in almost like in 4 years, this is the result that we've got, including that in 2019 and in 2020, we didn't have much precipitation. We didn't have much snow, of course, and these were one of the driest years. But thanks God, last year we've got very nice results. And this is how it looks like more or less at this moment. I hope that this year is much more water. So yeah, this is basically the canals that were digged out to use this land for agricultural purposes. And there are dams that look like this. This area was easily accessible for the excavators, so it wasn't handmade. It was done by the machines, and this is also, this picture shows the results of our work. There was a very interesting thing about this object, about the site, as this is the only place in Belarus of the natural existence of the silver fir, Abies alba. So we have to think of the buffer zone between the restoration sites and this tiny piece of forest, which is very very valuable, not to affect anyhow the plant, the tree. The third type of object is the forest drainage canals. This picture is taken in winter because in the summer it is really hard to capture those from the air, as all the canals lie down in dense forest. But here you can see how river already has, not the river, but how canals have already started in this decades to make their own paths, so the water cannot go straight. It doesn't like to go straight, so somehow it meanders itself. And our job was to block the canals, to make the water spread around the forest. For many reasons you already know, and this is what we've done. This was one of the ambitious projects at that time, and which we finalized it in 2021, and last year. We've built more than 1,000 dams, more than 100 dams. Some of them were plastic ones, which you see on the left. These were the areas with the high-speed streams to hold the water. And on the low-speed streams, there were, dams like you see on the right, the earthen dams. The thing is also the difficulty to work in this area is because it's also in the core zone of the national park, and it's really, really hardly accessible. Some of these dams were made with a very small excavators. I will show you a bit later. But most of them were also handmade. People had to go there with the shovels and created these dams, which was a very hard and time-consuming job. But luckily, last year we've completed this site. And now I'd like to lead you through the stages, the main stages that we go through in Belarus to restore any type of site, because I know they are different from the ones people have in Europe, and maybe for some of you, it would be nice to compare and to see what's the difference. So first is to select the restoration site. How do we do that? I will give you the example of the work that was done last year. I'm sorry, it is in Russian because I couldn't get it in English. So this is in red, you see the potential sites for restoration for the next 10 years in Białowieżska Puszcza. There was a big work done by the Academy of Science defining which are the priority objects, which are the priority sites to restore. And there was a scientific foundation and a big work under that. So something similar has been done in previous years, like 10 years ago. And by this scheme, we used to perform all our job. So first you define what are the priority objects, then you choose priority out of priority and start one by one using them. So the second one is the development of the scientific justification, a very important step. And I'll show you this on the example of the Nordycka River restoration in Białowieżska Puszcza on the Belarusian side. I know it has been restored in Poland before, but it took us a few years to finally come up to this idea and do what we've done. Unfortunately, we had to frozen this project on a later stage when everything was already done, finished, just except for the construction, which was supposed to be this. But already work a few years has been done, and I'd like to share a bit of it with you. So the blue is the current river stream existing right now. Also, you see the blue, the drainage channels for the agricultural use around the river. And in the red color, hope you see it well on that screen, these are the old meanders that the river used to run previously. So during the scientific justification, what was the old meanders, how river used to act, and what is the best way of restoring it? It was supposed to be one of the biggest, one of the most expensive, and one of the most ambitious projects we've ever done. And I'll repeat myself, I hope we can still do that in the future. Okay, the third and the fourth point are quite similar. We have to obtain the Land Selection Act and the permission of the development of the engineering project and the construction. So this is basically the paperwork we have to do with the local authorities and the government to get the permission to do something on this land. In Belarus, the whole land is owned by the government. So we don't have to talk to different stakeholders asking them to give us pieces of land they own. If we can deal this question with the government, with the local authorities, we can perform the restoration. If not, there are any other options. We cannot do it partly or anyhow else. So on one side, it is easier because we don't have to talk to too many people and ask them for their permission. We cannot buy land, for example, for the restoration. Yeah, but on the other hand, it is might be harder because we have only one option, one authority to ask whether we get the permission or not. The fifth is the development of the engineering project, including the ecological expertise. I will show you this on the example of the Żarkowszczyna engineering project. So this is basically how it looked like. The engineers take the scientific justification, and based on that, they go on the land and they decide which, where, how, which dam should be, how tall it should be, all the levels, all over the object. In this Żarkowszczyna, the total length of the canals was more than 20 kilometers in total. So it was a big chunk of work. And in general, I'd say that from the start, from the choose of the project to the end of the construction, it takes starting from 3 years and more. And this scientific justification also takes about a year. So the sixth point is construction. Like finally, in all those years, we've done all the previous 5 steps. And we can finally go to construction. As I said, it mainly depends on the area we're doing our job. In some of them, you can use these small excavators, like this one I've used in some areas of Žarkošina. In the others, you can use the big ones, which makes work much easier, cheaper, and faster. But in the rest, it has to be hand work. And the last one, but also very, very important step, is the monitoring of what we've done and the maintenance of the dams. Because with a matter of time, of course, there is some damage to the dams, and we have to make sure that they are in a good condition to perform what they were built for. And in terms of vegetation, of course, it's a groundwater level monitoring, and the vegetation monitoring, like you see in this picture. Last year, we've done a survey in this Nordycka that we has performed in 2017. And you like literally see in this picture like that the vegetation has changed towards the one more usual for the Mayas, which is a very good sign. Also, we monitor the birds and other wildlife that is returning to this restored ecosystems. So I think this is basically what I wanted to tell you. I hope you enjoyed some look into how this work is being performed in Belarus. And I really, really hope we can continue that in the future, because life and water is really, really important. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
Yeah, do you have any questions?
Maybe one.
There is one question. Well, can you see me? I only see this.
Yes, I do. I do.
Just because I'm also working on a project of remeandering the rivers. I didn't quite get, you put just a dam to put the river back in its old way?
Yeah, okay, sorry, I wasn't like too much talking about this. So there are different options. For example, in the one that we're planning to do, I said the big river Nordycka, we have divided the river in 4 different sections. And for each section, there were different methods supposed to be used. For example, where the old meander is seen, you can just put a dam and you know that the river will find its way through the old meander. But there are, of course, certain places where the meander cannot be seen. And in these cases, we have to use the excavator to dig out the riverbed so the river, like we show the river where to go. This is like different 2 types we use, of course, and this is what was supposed to be used in our new project. As far as I know, Nordycka River was mostly restored using this excavator work in Poland.
Well, I'm in Iceland, but well, we haven't started that project, so I've never done it. We're mostly working with the ditches, so we block them.
I really, really hope it's going to be good and you can restore.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Slava, you are next.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me and have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, we haven't tasted
Oh, yeah, well, kind of misunderstanding. So you're on the meeting on your computer.
Yes. This was the trick. So,
Good to tell me first then.
sorry.
Yeah.
sorry. I tried first to send this via email, but the file is enormously big, and I decided to use my own stuff
This is perfect.
in order to present.
Very good.
But anyway, sorry for inconvenience. I will tell you a short story about a sort of case how we as OTOP, while implementing the big biodiversity conservation project, managed to somehow use this carbon story as a side story, and we also succeed to commodify it. Well. So first, a couple of words about our main project. Our main project was dedicated to conservation of the aquatic warbler. You know, this is the globally most endangered passerine, and OTOP works hard for many years in order to protect the species in Poland, which is one of the main strongholds of the species, and inter alia, OTOP has implemented several big life projects, which were mostly about implementation of the mowing techniques and management in their own reserves and other places important for the aquatic warbler. Then we made some awareness raising for the local people and the general public, and also a big effort was made in terms of international cooperation. And this is not this list is not exhaustive. I just listed main directions, and one of the projects, the next project in line, in fact, entitled Enhancement of the Southeastern Metapopulation of the Aquatic Warbler in Poland, and the main idea of the project was that due to the efforts made in the main habitats of the species starts dispersing over the adjoining areas from the major settlements, and the species just needs some suitable habitats in order to breed and live. And our idea was to establish so-called stepping stone corridors in the east of Poland, which could help in dispersion of these species from the main strongholds like Biebrza River Valley, or Zwaniec in Belarus, or Paleski National Park, or national parks in Ukraine. So our main idea was to find the most suitable habitats, maybe not completely intact, and to put them in the favorable condition for the species. Therefore, we first pre-selected some 13 sites in the east of Poland, and the program minimum for them was to develop and implement some sort of management regulations for the land owners. And out of those 13 sites, we also decided to restore the hydrological conditions and the natural conditions in general for the aquatic warbler on the 3 sites. And with this purpose, we planned to raise several dams. Some of them were wooden, or some of them concrete, and that was the plan. And European structural funds were used for this purpose. We applied to the so-called POISH program, which is made, which was designed in order so-called cohesion fund. When Poland joined the European Union, it was granted some money in order to bring up, in order to improve the infrastructure in Poland. This POISH program works for this purpose, and the sum was more or less €500,000 for this particular project. So in terms of the sites which were selected for the say hard measures, there were 3 of them, called respectively Haleszów, Krychów, and Kaming. The parts of our participants of today's meeting has already visited all those sites and made I hope, enjoyed them, but there are, as a sort of reminder, they are on the map here. So they all are adjoining to the eastern border of Poland. So they lie in the east of Poland. So this is how the sites look like before. They are typical drained peatlands, actually fen mires. You see all those beaches and this picture, which is typical for such sites. And we started building dikes, but building dikes was just the finish of the process and the beginning of the process. It started from some preliminary activities, which were connected with selection, the negotiations with the landowners, so on and so forth. It took us 9 months, another 11 months we needed in order to develop the engineering projects, in order to obtain all the necessary permissions from the authorities, and also to agree with the landowners, because the land tenure there is very patchy. And this is the specific of this project, that was relying mostly on the cooperation from the parts of private landowners, unlike other projects which were like made in cooperation with state forests and other state institutions. Here we entirely relied on the goodwill and willingness of the private landowners, and it took us some 11 more months. And finally, the construction works. You see that this is not the longest part of the story. It also took us about 9 months, but we have to take into account the COVID situation, the pandemics, and other things, political things in the east of Poland as well. And totally, it took us almost 30 months, cradle to grave, to build those 10 dikes. And how it looks like after the erection of those dikes, you have seen, the part of you have seen them like in reality, but there are some pictures. And suddenly we have came up with the idea, why not to use the positive side effect in terms of climate mitigation, because you know that I don't want to repeat what was already told in this audience, that of course peatlands are very promising in this respect. They are considered most space effective and efficient carbon stores on the of all the terrestrial ecosystems, and the effect, the potential of emission reduction of the peatlands is comparable to that of forests, given that the surface of the peatlands, the degraded peatlands, is much less than the global forests, and therefore the effect is promising. And also Pavel has mentioned in more details and more more significantly, more scientifically, that in terms of peatlands drainage and peatlands rewetting, there are various processes which could either increase or decrease the carbon fluxes, and indeed the question is if the balance is negative or positive, and there are different ways to measure it. And you know that the direct and instrumental measurements of the greenhouse gas balance are complicated, as Pavel mentioned. Therefore, we went another way. We stuck to guess methodology, which is a proxy method, which relies on the vegetation dynamics as an indicator of the water table dynamics. And with this purpose, we made some baseline field assessment in June 2021, just in case, we didn't think about commodification at that time. The idea was that before the rewetting itself, it's good to assess the baseline, how it looks like. And with this purpose, we put together with the RSPB, because RSPB helped us in terms of funds and assistance. We involved the guest specialists from Germany, namely Nadia Leszczyńska, who is mentioned here and cited here, in fact. And she produced, she first made the baseline field assessment, and then she produced the prediction report, which showed that our project would rather yield some positive climatic mitigation effect in terms of emission reduction. So a couple of photos showing the backstage of the guest process. I perfectly understand what makes you laughing, because it's ubiquitously known that guest is about making releases in the field, about water table measurements with the help of divers, about enjoying cacti. This is like prescribed. And finally, this is the resultant table from the emission reduction report produced by Nadia Leszczyńska, which shows that we are, say, on the positive side. So the emission reduction is likely to be generated by our sites, and you see that the sites are not equal in this respect, and there are better and worse sites. And the prediction is like this. You see that the pictures on the left are guests as of today, or as of 2021, before the rewetting, and prediction is on the right hand side, and you see that the plots tend to get more homogeneous, and it means that the habitat would be like more moist, which is good for us. This is our third site, and this is the on the bottom you can see the total estimated emission reduction effect for the coming 20 years, which is over 20,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And this is a sort of positive output, but what to do with it? And our main strategy of commodification was to find some institution which would be willing to contribute somehow to this project in exchange for some simple thing. And this simple thing is a piece of paper, in fact, put in the frame, and it's very nice. You can put it on the wall. You can be proud of it. And in fact, the goods, the commodity, because we're talking about commodification, is a piece of paper. However, this piece of paper has some symbolic value, and this symbolizes that the institution sort of bought a part of this positive effect in terms of over almost 600 tons of CO2 equivalent. And our investor or our partner, how to say, I don't know, because this I'll be talking about it a little bit later. But anyway, it was the IT company. You know, IT companies, they have many frequent flyers in their stuff. They produce the huge carbon trace, and like seeking the opportunity to somehow offset it or compensate it, they are looking for opportunities like this, and therefore they were willing to buy this nice piece of paper. And thanks to RSPB, who were like our intermediates in those talks and negotiations with them. We strike a deal with them, so it has been done. A little bit in terms of wording here, because normally such type of commodity is called in the literature carbon credits, but are those indeed the carbon credits? It's very doubtful, because carbon credits by definition are credible permits. So if you are buying carbon credits, you can then sell them. It's like a market good or market good. You can't sell out this certificate, even if there is somebody willing to buy it. It doesn't symbolize that he also contributed to the process. So this is more complicated, and we were trying to find appropriate wording here, and there were some ideas like carbon points instead of carbon credits, or maybe carbon values, and maybe carbon values is the best choice, because this is like symbolic value. So there are many positive connotations with the word value. So we let us keep this sort of terminology. And next issue is, does it pay in principle to do so? Because in order to obtain this positive effect, you should invest something. Yeah. So I have to underline that here on this plot, you can see only the direct costs of building and construction of the dikes and project design development and so on and so forth. It doesn't account for our organizational like overheads or our work as specialists. This is like what we paid to our contractors in order to erase those dikes and implement the project. And as you see, the bulk is connected with construction itself. The second largest cost was the cost of engineering project, producing of the engineering project and obtaining all the permissions, because it also costs. And only 8% of the direct costs went like for guests in order to employ the appropriate expert and to pay to the certifying institution, which was the DUNE. DUNE is a sort of organization affiliated with the University of Greifswald, which invented this methodology. So their certificate is like respected, let's say. So, but if we have sort of sold out a little bit more than 500 tons of CO2 equivalent, but if we imagine that we managed to sell out all our emission reduction pool, it would cover up to a quarter of those costs. So in terms of finance, it doesn't pay. However, the beavers do it much cheaper, and they do it much faster too. This is one of the main, say, conclusions of this project. Sorry?
Save the beavers.
Save the beavers, yeah. Beavers, even beavers also. Beavers. So the problems and lessons learned from this small commodification exercise. So the first, I have to unfortunately repeat that rewetting of the semi-intact, because our sites were mostly semi-intact. They were good enough, but not sufficient for aquatic border, but they were still semi-natural, like meadows or fenmires. It's couldn't be profitable because of low additionality. If you improve something which is good enough, you earn very little in terms of the climatic mitigation effort. However, as Franziska mentioned before today, if we take a potato field, some natural habitat which was transformed into potato field as a result of amelioration, you can achieve much more ambitious effect. Another thing which was sort of impediment to our project and to our activities was that the transactions like this, they need clearly defined property rights. But here it's not clear who owns this asset. Does it OTOP as the organization which made it possible, or does it the landowner because the land belongs to him or to her? This is not clear, at least in the light of the contemporary Polish law. So this is a sort of impediment, and it made many doubts on our side when we are trying to implement. Another thing is another observation and lesson learned is that existing regulations, including the international regulations and the visions of the international institutions, they neglect the peatlands reverting carbon as compared to, for instance, forest carbon, and we have to take it into account. And one of the say conclusions is that we can only sell it out on very low prices, which are much lower than the official market prices. So the self-sustaining for rewetting with the climatic, purely climatic goals is not possible at the moment. However, if we try to take into account, say, the positive effect for biodiversity, it could be different. Another point is that bureaucratic procedures are extremely long and complicated for rewetting in Poland, and you see in parentheses in Belarus, in Germany, you name it, in every country basically. It also precludes many organizations, individuals, or groups from undertaking activities like this. And however, on the positive side, we can conclude that it's possible, still possible for the conservationist NGO, not a big one like OTOP, to earn small but unrestricted and therefore highly liquid money. And many organizations, they are lacking some such sort of funds which you can normally spend on whatever you want, which are not like contracted or prescribed in the budget or whatever. They are out of the pocket money. In terms of room for improvement, possible improvement, Franziska today mentioned the existing schemes which exist for projects like this in Germany, so-called More Futures version 1, version 2, or similar schemes to promote and market the peatlands carbon. And there are two ways, either to create the same scheme in Poland or in your country, or to try to, say, use the existing ones. And we already started talking with University of Greifswald and other stakeholders in terms of possibility to join such schemes. Maybe it could be a sort of regional scheme which could unite like Germany, Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and the same examples exist, for instance, in North America, when some of the United States, I mean states of the United States, have like joint system with some Canadian provinces. If I'm not mistaken, California with Quebec and Ontario. And one important thing, and I have again underlined it again, is that some legal track which should be worked out in order to sell carbon points or values or whatever, in order to like preclude or like rule out some negative consequences when, for instance, the landowner suddenly wakes up and says, wait, this is mine. And as the main conclusion, promotion of the biodiversity system engineering is very important. So thank you very much for your attention, and maybe there would be some questions I would try to answer. Yes, please.
So the 580 something tons you sold,
Yes,
they were estimated,
yes,
like
Yes.
into the future estimate.
yes, absolutely. From that pool, which is from now to 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like if this could be implemented in some form in a similar fashion in Iceland, you would look at that possible area, they would rewet it and then sell that to a
Yes, the expert would produce the report that the
Yeah.
carbon pool is such and such,
Mhm.
and so the certifying institution will certify it. All the calculations are consistent with the state of the art.
Yeah.
And you are you can show it to your investor. Look, there is a carbon pool.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool.
Yes, Pavel?
Because I appreciate the idea if someone wants to get the money from the restoration of the wedding, I'd like to get but between us, the experts. Before the restoration, it was the bud emitter of the green pockets.
Pardon?
From degraded bud emitter
Mhm.
from degraded peat.
Yes.
After the restoration, there's still the emitter, but emits slightly less.
Yes.
That's there is not the effects of removing carbon from atmosphere, but only the effect to some reduction of the carbon for the climate.
Absolutely.
Do you think it is indeed fair to pay owners, landowners, not for some service as removing the carbon, but for decreasing the carbon, but it is still harmful. Yeah? From the point of view of climate, we must not to reduce emission from the peatlands, but zero emission from the degraded peatlands, and we must start to peat forming process to remove carbon from atmosphere.
Absolutely.
It's the quite different level of ambition.
Absolutely.
Than the system of the carbon credit for decreasing the carbon.
So, but the decrease in the carbon is still positive.
Of course, but I think that in the fair world, if we consider the European rule, the polluters pay seriously, it should be that the farmer owning the drying peatlands should pay annually very huge tax for his emission. And if he agree to rewet the peatlands, it will pay less.
Yes.
And if we're not going to pay the tax, they should sell the land to the state or to the conservation NGO, which implement total rewetting and total zero the emission. And in such words, the financing of the rewetting will be sustainable.
Yes.
But nobody
I would even opt. This is in between us experts. I would even opt for if he or she doesn't compensate it to zero, he is put before the execution clock. However, this is the sort of philosophic question. Would you prefer to have 1/10 of the apple or zero?
Yeah.
And this is the answer.
And there is another story. Once you should start, and you should, this is the pioneer work. Of course, not for us, not probably for Pavel, but we should learn. And you show the way. You show all our mistakes and let's say some problems, which we should now work and improve.
Absolutely.
So if we will not start this work, even with this minimal stopping the emission, there will be no progress. So I think it's necessary. And we are not living in ideal world. Anyway.
Yes.
Just a short question, because you said that what we sold was not real credit, carbon credits.
Yes, because the buyer is very unlikely to resell it to somebody else.
Yeah. But my question is, shall we go for this, let's say, new idea of carbon values, or shall we rather stick to the carbon credit and try to have real carbon credits?
Realistically thinking, I think we should go into carbon values, because the organization like this, in the conditions of lack, some institutional, outward institutional conditions, it's almost impossible for us to generate carbon credits, I think. So carbon values, carbon points, or whatever, it's a sort of way out. And this is also the respective deal, like carbon offset. You can find plenty of literature. Yes, please.
So, I have a question which, apologies, is as much for Parnell as it is for you. I've thought about it during your presentation. So you both mentioned that you received life money for some of the work in Poland. Am I right to think some of that money was for either compensation or even land purchase payments? And if so, I'm wondering whether our colleagues in Iceland, whether having money to buy land or compensate landowners might help remove some of the barriers that they described to us. So, as I say, sorry, it's harking back to the earlier.
Well, in terms of life project, exactly the life projects, I'm not so much competent in this. In terms of OTOP, life projects implemented by OTOP, it's better ask to ask Jarek, because all those projects were implemented before me joining OTOP. However, I think in terms of Iceland, in terms of other countries, well, I'm just starting thinking, because there is a special sub-program within LIFE, which is Life Climate. And I think it could be like a feasible option.
Thanks. Yeah, do you know if you use life money to actually buy land, purchase land?
Yes, yes, we did, especially in our first life project. We purchased a lot of large areas of land for at least 2 entities. First, one of our partners was the National Park, BirdLife National Park, and they purchased the most important, I mean, this is more, let's say, critical parts which are necessary for restoring, and this is one. And we are now, we have purchased the land within the buffer zone of Białowieża National Park, where we have established the OTOP nature reserves. We have 3 nature reserves there, so we now have also the habitat monitoring expert in this reserve. So yes, indeed, LIFE is probably one of the best European funds for buying the land for nature conservation. This official one. Other, of course, there are private sponsors, like for example, the ELP, International Landscape Program.
Great, thanks. So for Shinna and Gun, I know money is not the main problem in Iceland, but if you could go to a landowner and say, we will buy this 200 hectares of unused, degraded wetlands and then rewet it, would that help, or will they say, no, go away, it's my land?
I mean, examples, maybe good to have an option.
Yeah. Okay.
But then I always think we have a general lack of educating the public.
Sure, that is, I mean,
I think it's like a huge barrier. And you see how easy it is to sell trees. And there's so many, because you have the forestry department and many small forestries with just volunteers all over the country. And people like growing trees and they're doing something. And there's nothing like that going on.
Like in Belarus.
Could I ask also the question about compensation? Could that be something that buying a land that's very permanent? You give your land away for money, okay, but you can't get it back. But if you get a compensation, and that would spread around. I got some money for like, oh, maybe this nice spot.
You get paid for planting trees. Yeah, so you should get paid
And,
for
maybe sorry.
Sorry.
This is fine.
Yeah, because I just wanted to say that within this deal, we also thought about compensating to those landowners, like at least a part of it. It was a very humble amount of money we earned, but we just wanted to give a part of them, but we hadn't any legal background for what. And in the sense of the Polish law, this is like for nothing. Therefore, I underline that it should be like a legal track and commonly recognized legal track. How we do those deals, and that the landowner can like claim for compensation for his land, and the organization which implemented the project should also have some returns out of it.
But returning to the compensation and work with farmers, I don't know it's the best solution, but for us in Poland to make farmers happy to carry out the bird-friendly management was they compensated within European Union agro-environmental schemes. So within the first LIFE project, which were by OTOP prepared in the early stages when we joined EU, we of course purchased the land, we prepared the management of land, but we also developed long-term incentives. So we even within OTOP, within this project, by the way, also prepared by Victor Fenchuk, I mentioned today, we have developed the work with Ministry of Agriculture to prepare for them our agro-environmental packages for birds. For example, aquatic welfare package, water protection package, and other bird schemes. And then when farmers learn that they can earn money, and quite good amount of money, just for mowing, just for simple management of the land, they were very happy that they have this bird on the land. Yes, exactly. And of course, it's very local, only for the most valuable areas in Poland. But anyway, it helps because they are compensating for not draining, for proper management, and so on. So I don't know how it is in Iceland. If you have some systems similar to EU, I mean within any your rural development program, such agro-environmental schemes. It is, I know it's well developed in Switzerland, now in UK, which you are not in EU, but anyway, you have already best experience in this, and some other countries which are not in EU. And I don't know how it is in Iceland, or I don't know how it is in Norway.
No, we don't have anything.
No, it's really like production related.
So, like we have, 30 years ago.
Yeah. But we have this new project called Climate Friendly Farmers, but that's not. That's
not
like,
biodiversity.
No, it's just carbon. So you can like put some species everywhere, and then we went.
So I will, again propose some kind of resolution. I'm just considering to work in long term, speak with BirdLife Iceland in this direction, because it's really important. I know how was it important for Poland when we joined EU. And you know, there are many good examples, so you should not you know, learn from scratch, but prepare it from scratch. You can learn from UK, Switzerland, for example, or other non-EU country, and of course EU, because there are also big diversity of the schemes in EU member states. Anyway, I would really recommend this. Of course, it's long-term work, but anyway, very, very good. Of course, land purchase is very good, but then to convince farmers, it's I think the payments, compensation payments within the Ministry of Agriculture and EU Ministry. Yes, that's the best. Yes, because there is a problem of budget. I mean, let's say, excuse me, rich countries like Switzerland, also because now UK, but I don't know how it is in Norway.
Hi. Because part of the project is preparing the binational hand-on manual on rewetting, I was asked to prepare rationale for development of this and propose the draft structure of such manual. First of all, what for? The answer is rather clear, but not so clear as expected, because there are a lot of guidelines, and is there one more indeed necessary? For example, there is a very good global guidelines for peatlands rewetting and restoration, which was published in some months ago by Josten as a technical report of the Ramsar Convention. But the answer for what for is rather clear. General problem, as in Polish situation, is upscaling, and it is very huge upscaling. It means we need a lot of experience exchange, and it means that even several guidelines how to do it will be not too much. Rewetting, at least in Poland, must be upscaled about 100 times. Similarly in Iceland, even if you have some strategy for rewetting and some national program, in Poland we have the draft of such program, but the program needs implementation. Implementation means very, very huge change in comparison to the present situation. That's we need all hands on the boat, and we need every which we can to prepare to improve the process and to improve the upscaling. The second question is why binational Icelandic Polish? Of course, this is probably because of funding, but what about the merits? The answer here is also rather simple. I don't know. But it is so strange that a lot of readers will be attracted, I'm sure. What we can put inside, I must tell that it is only my first proposition as for opening the discussion. And now it is only it is contradictory to the idea to prepare binational, but the Icelandic experience will be added in the discussion and during the work, I hope. It is the very first proposition based on the Polish experience only. Introduction, what peatlands means and how the peatland work, very, very synthetic, with basic information on ecohydrology, including acrotherm, catotherm concept, is very basic information about peatland as geoecosystem and its function. What rewetting means, because rewetting is not each making something more wet. It's rather to make something peatland wet enough to switch to boggy processes, to switch the ecological processes from degradation, consecutive degradation, at least to stop the degradation and if possible to restoration. We need probably some basic information about peatlands in Iceland and peatlands in Poland as the resources, diversity, scale of drainage, scale of other degradation, the degrading factors, and rationale of rewetting, both biodiversity and climate. But of course, it is the introduction. First question which the guidelines should answer. It is the probably how to recognize the peatland as it is before the starting the restoration. What should be recognized before? Water supply, hydrology, water parameters, annual cycle of water level, biodiversity, location of peatland in landscape, topography, surface, ditches, other alteration of the peatland, peat stratigraphy, and the peat decomposition, of course. And because there are a lot of very, very different situations, at least in Poland, my proposition is that the text should present pros and contrast, both for very simple, intuitive approach to the planning restoration and for the advanced studies. There is no single recipe. In fact, the various approach may be more relevant in various situations. Some trick and tips which should be presented probably. This is the use of LiDAR for recognizing the box surface and for very precise the mapping the ditches, using the photo interpretation, using of drones, recurrent mapping of surface water as the water in ditches, empty or fill of water is very useful and very simple method of analyzing the hydrology of Polish wetlands. And also we should make accent of the common mistakes. For example, rely on official maps only. At least in Poland, sometimes the official maps are not very credible. For importance of such mistake as the wrong recognition of water supply sources, for importance of eventual missing some ditches, which is maybe result of basing on the official maps, but the using of LiDAR surface scanning can prevent this. The next important issue is how to negotiate what should be studied before restoration about not peatland itself, but about peatland social environment, ownership, present land use, interest of various stakeholders, interest of some public interest as, for example, the flood control, and how the public acceptation for a rewetting idea can be achieved. It is very, very important issue because in practice, lack of such acceptation block a lot of possible restoration project. Of course, it may be by negotiation, it may be by enforcing if we have the relevant legal instrument. But for example, what arguments we can use for limands? What incentives we can offer to landowner and peatland owner? What instruments we are available in Poland and Iceland? Probably also we should present what harmful instrument we have in both countries as the payments for the tree planting on the peat box, for example. What would be the long-term benefits we can use as arguments for landowner, and what offers of other improvements we can prepare, as for example the offer of preparing something like tourist facilities, which is as a rule very appreciated by the owner or by the local communities, but maybe not very harmful for wetlands if well prepared. Of course, there are also some tricks and tips. For example, my favorite argument with negotiation with the local community is that I am going to keep water in peatlands. It means the water will not flood your meadow. As I show you in my former presentation, sometimes hydrological modeling may be very useful in communication with stakeholders, even over its real value for predicting of the of the water behavior. But common mistakes, of course, restoration not negotiated enough, some missing details in negotiation. Not agreed enough long-term rules. Of course, I can negotiate to building the dams and to building the waves, but the question is who will manage it after 10 years and how it will be managed. Sometimes, of course, the problem is if the third-party impact of the third-party ground is unpredicted in the project preparation, or sometimes I face the problem of over-interpretation of possible impact. It means, one example from Slovenski National Park. I start to negotiate the peatland rewetting project with the local community. And I still negotiate only and think about doing this and make only preparatory work with some water level monitor. But the year was very rainy and the stakeholders, what was the meadows overflooded. They commonly interpret that it is result of my peatland rewetting. Yes. Even before I have implemented everything on the ground. Yeah, that's yeah. That's such social issue we must take under consideration. Sometimes there is the situation that we can okay. Sometimes we of course can achieve agreement with stakeholders, but it is in fact the agreement for nothing. Yeah, we agree that try to do something, but this is in fact not restoration at all. Sometimes there are some harmful aspects, as for example tourism development, which of course may be sustainable, but not always is sustainable, may be also harmful for the wetlands. I think that that issue should be, of course, very synthetically presented in the wetlands. How to plan the restoration and rewetting? Is the amount of water enough? Is the water parameters okay? What is the supply, sources of the water supply? Sometimes we can consider the additional sources, but it is very complicated because if we use other water than naturally supply the peat bog, it is very problematic from the ecological point of view. One of the main questions is what can be or cannot be achieved. Sometimes we declare that we are going to restore the peat bog, but in fact the restoration is irreversible. In fact, in such situation, we can improve the situation a bit, but cannot promise all around that we restore this site because sometimes it is simply impossible. Where to stop the outflow? How to where locate the dam? Should the blocking ditches be regulated or permanent? If regulated, how to regulate in details and how to regulate in long-term perspective also. Should we use the natural or artificial methods of construction of dams, close to nature solution or the concrete dams? What vegetation management should be implemented, if any? My idea is also to present here the pros and cons for various possible approaches, because there is huge variation of the real cases, and in fact each approach is relevant for some situation in the practice. Of course, there are also some tricks and tips. For example, the close to nature solution, which probably are the best in many cases, also because they reduce the bureaucratic burden of proceeding and collecting the necessary consent. Thinking about initiating future natural processes will follow the restoration without our intervention. Try to try to build the self-sustainable solution. For example, in many cases, the beavers can be provoked to build the dams, upgrading our wooden dams. I have a lot of sight with such situation when where the beavers continue my effort. In fact, perfect from the point of view of the restoration. Some tip is also redundancy. In my project, I always build more dams than it's necessary indeed, because I need to have some reserve for some unexpected events, as for example, the damaging one of the dam by current of water, etc., etc. If I have a bit redundant system of ditches blocking, such incidents don't diminish the general effect. But also some common mistakes, as overestimated possibilities and feasibility, using of inappropriate water. For example, try to re-wet the raised bog by the water from the river. It's no sense from the ecological point of view. It's typical mistake. Sometimes we have the problem with eutrophisation and peak of methane emission, and also it is important how try to avoid it. One of the common mistakes is the dam location is not dense enough, that the number of dams is underestimated. But on the other hand, sometimes some facilities are oversized. Sometimes we build not necessarily very huge concrete dams in situation in which the smaller one, the pit or wooden would be necessary. And there is also the problem of sometimes biodiversity harm, because restoration, as each other activities, may also be followed by the negative impact for some species of plants, animals, etc. We should take it under consideration. Of course, it not means that it is always possible to avoid. Sometimes it is better to even to destroy the small fragment of the natural habitats to improve the general hydrology of the rest. But we must be aware of such situation and also the legal limitation of them. Next important question is how to proceed, how to go throughout the formal procedures. What are the national legal frames in Poland and Islandia? What necessary contents need to be collected before the implementation of the restoration? What formal documentation is necessary, and what administrative procedures we need to go throughout? Of course, tricks and tips are keep as simple as possible. Very, very important is appropriate name of our action. For example, my Polish experience is if I name something as the building the dams, it is followed by a lot of bureaucratic burdens for collecting the building concept. If I name the same activity, exactly the same activity as the reconstruction of ditches to stop the water flow, it requires only one water permit, but building concept is totally not applied in the situation. There is the very huge difference, because preparing documentation for building consent costs exactly the same amount of money as the building itself. Yeah? Then I can save the half of my money if only I find the appropriate name for my action. And of course, use the nature-based solution if possible, because they usually need a very, very reduced administrative burden. Common mistake is, of course, not using these trip and ticks. Of course, I have about 20 years of experience that I make all these mistakes by myself. Next question is how to implement, which is the essential of the restoration. But in fact, it is the simplest stage and no specific recommendation are necessary. Simple implement what you plan. But the important question is how to monitor water, how to monitor vegetation, how to monitor biodiversity. Use the piezometers, make the measurement by hand, so automatic. Surface water mapping is rather cheap, but rather effective in presenting the success. How to monitor vegetation by maps covering all the site or by permanent plots. How recurrent surveys are necessary for monitoring biodiversity. Of course, we still need to keep each of the chapter very, very synthetic, but my general idea is to present pros and contrasts for various approach from the very, very small monitoring by visiting the place and looking, is it better or not, to the much more advanced, for example, water monitoring, which is of course costly, need resources, but also provide very, very, very interesting information and sometimes allow to present better our results to others. Of course, tricks and tips: use the automatic water level recorders if possible, because in my impression it can provide significant added value if we record everyday water level. We can detect, for example, the reaction of the peat bog for the rainfall. Use of the drones and consecutive mapping of surface water is rather cheap, but provide very useful information for assessment of result of our intervention. Sometimes always the intuitive assessment, that's I will go look and it seems better, is not so bad as it seems to be. Sometimes such reports from the consecutive visits are very, very valuable material for monitoring of the site. Sometimes some biodiversity indicators are very useful. For example, in Poland, some amphibians, there are no amphibians in Iceland, but maybe other indicators may be used as the simple signal that something was improved. But also the common mistakes, the lack of monitoring, never visit the site again, restore and never see it again. Monitoring not long-term enough. It's quite often mistake, because in fact, full effect of the restoration we can achieve after 10, 15 or 20 years, not after 1 or 2 years. Monitoring not located in the point we can achieve the change is also the very common mistake. The situation in fact is improved, but the monitoring don't show it to us, and it's problematic from the point of view of project reporting. But also the misinterpretation of natural variation as the change achieved as a result of restoration. It is the mistake, but sometimes it's useful for reporting the project to donor. For example, if we are very lucky, we have the dry year before restoration and wet year after restoration, the perfect situation for reporting success. How to estimate climate benefits? We can present pros and contrast of various methods and various approaches, but in general, do not expect credible numbers in a single peat bog scale. It may be we can achieve some message to donors and message to general public, but between us experts, we could not put too much confidence in available methodologies of even of direct measurements, and also to the guest or IPCC factor estimation. Maybe the simplest method, the correlation between water level and the greenhouse gases balance, is the best in fact. We should also consider also the removed biomass in the carbon balance. And the last point, how to report our success, because I have no doubts that we must report success, not failure of restoration, because the restoration is most often implemented as the funded project, and it must be ended by the success report. what indicators may be interpreted as the success. If the peatlands is wet longer during the year, even if the average water level change is not visible, there is the very simple information that, for example, the water in the ditches every year is present still in the summer. Yeah, is probably the first effect we can notice after the restoration. The second probably is some biodiversity improvement, some species related to the wetland habitats, for wet wetlands habitats, we can record on our site. Of course, very often we report that water level is increased by, for example, 20 centimeters. In fact, it means nothing without the more details what we are thinking about, because there is nothing like that the water level in the wetlands. There is the water regime with the water level changing and fluctuating, and we can talk about the maximum one, the minimum one, the average one, but we should precise about what we are reporting. Water retention, we can calculate in cubic meter of retented water, but of course it is also the question how to do it. And of course we can report, although it's not very credibly, some climate benefits as the prevented emission of the greenhouse gases. On the picture you can see one of the nice effects of the restoration. Here the tourist facility was prepared, but the restoration success was underestimated during the project, and we achieved, as you see, the tourist facility is perfect, but the tourists will have very close contact with the water, which is in fact the good impression of wetlands. Thank you very much.
Question? Yes, please, or just one, not a question. In Iceland, we only do this dams, or well, at least we use the soil, as you saw. We never put concrete or anything, but you still need a full building permission.
Yeah, it's difference between Poland and Iceland, and we should present the difference because it's simple interesting for the readers.
So even if I only say I'm restoring wetlands and only natural, it doesn't matter.
In Poland,
you should name it in proper way.
Yes. Well, I just get a permit for restoring wetlands.
No, but you should have a permit for any other activity which is very important for agriculture. The Papa will consider this.
Generally in Poland, some years ago, we also have the very complicated law, and we must ask for building permission also for elsewhere. But after following some European Union legislation, the law was changed, and now all the building legislation is applied to facilities using the building materials. Then we can interpret that earth and peat is not the building material because it's not certified, not sort of building material. Then all earthworks are outside the building law. And of course, I never asked the building administration, should I collect your permit? Because the golden rule is don't ask because you can get an answer inappropriate for you. But before it is out of building legislation, it is totally out of interest of building administration. And while I will do it without asking them, only ask for water permit.
Yeah, this is like a municipality level here.
Yeah.
That's the municipality, so I need the permission. Yes.
Of course. So don't ask.
And then they charge. No, because I don't want to be like the forestry. They never ask. And I should be like, yeah.
Poland there is a separate water administration, it's totally separate,
Yes.
and the building administration is on the county level. Yeah?
Yes, yes.
And some competences on the level of municipality. And generally, I must apply to water administration for water permit.
Yes.
Of course, because I changed the water regime, I must
to make something an unofficial agreement on the local level with the local community, but I don't need to ask the country unit administration, and I avoid spending a lot of money for the blueprint of the West.
I think you say in common mistakes that sometimes it's water is not proper. How do you understand if it's proper water or not proper water?
There are the various kinds of wetlands.
Yeah.
Each kind of wetlands have the specific eco-hydrology. Yeah? It means, for example, that if I have alkaline wetlands, it must be supplied by alkaline underground water. And sometimes in some project beneficiaries try, for example, to block the stream to increase water level in the wetland. But the stream water is not the same as an alkaline underground water. And in fact, they make harm, not benefit, because they degrade the alkaline wetlands by providing the water with inappropriate
I see, but how then you will prevent this area if it's a water stream and not
for alkaline peatlands, alkaline fans, it's rather difficult because for alkaline peatlands we rather need to restore the percolation of underground water from the peat. It is not necessary to block the ditches, but you must to fill the ditches by the peat from neighborhood. Our block is very dense net of dams you must delete the linear flow of water on the surface. Yeah? You must enforce water to percolate throughout the peat. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. This was the perfect example. The similar I can find in Poland. You must need very tight dams. Yeah.